Hi guys, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you find this content informative, please subscribe to the channel for more updates. What happens when a basketball player answers one controversial question and suddenly finds herself at the center of a national debate? That is exactly what happened to Sophie Cunningham. For years, Cunningham was known primarily as a tough, fearless WNBA player, the kind of athlete who never seemed interested in backing down from a confrontation. But one interview changed the scale of her public profile almost overnight. When Cunningham was asked about transgender athletes competing in women's sports, she gave an answer that immediately divided opinion. She said she believed women's sports should protect biological female athletes and pushed back against accusations that her position meant she hated transgender people. Instead of walking those comments back, she stood by them when reporters questioned her again. Then something unexpected happened. The debate escaped the basketball world entirely. Cunningham's comments were amplified by major political figures, supporters began praising her publicly, and critics accused her of using her platform in a deeply divisive fight. Suddenly, people who had never watched her play had an opinion about Sophie Cunningham. But the most dramatic chapter came later. Two teenage fans showed up at a Seattle Storm game carrying a simple message thanking Cunningham for speaking up for girls. According to their account, a Storm co-owner confronted them and used profanity toward them. The incident eventually led to a WNBA suspension and fine, turning a political argument into a league-wide controversy. And then Cunningham responded in a way many people didn't expect. Instead of pouring more fuel onto an already explosive situation, she emphasized kindness, defended the teenagers, and offered to send them gifts. So how did one interview turn Sophie Cunningham from a basketball player into one of the WNBA's most talked-about figures? And why did the controversy become much bigger than anyone expected? The controversy did not begin with a fight on the court, it began with a question. In an ESPN feature published on July 21, Sophie Cunningham was asked directly about one of the most divisive issues in women's sports, transgender athletes competing in women's competition. And instead of giving the carefully worded answer many athletes might choose, Cunningham was blunt. She said she wanted to protect young girls in sports and in locker rooms, arguing that female athletes should not have to compete against biological males. It was a position guaranteed to generate reactions, especially coming from an active WNBA player at a time when the league was already surrounded by intense debate. But Cunningham wasn't finished. One of the biggest questions surrounding her comments was whether taking that position meant she was attacking or hating transgender people. Cunningham rejected that characterization. She made a distinction between opposing certain policies and hating the people affected by them. That distinction became central to the entire controversy. The interesting part was that Cunningham didn't disappear after the interview. She didn't suddenly issue a carefully crafted apology or try to pretend the comments had been misunderstood. When reporters asked her about the interview before a game against the Connecticut Sun, she stood by what she had said. "I said what I said." Those 5 words helped transform a controversial interview into something much bigger. Supporters saw a professional athlete refusing to be intimidated by criticism. Critics argued that her comments could contribute to an already hostile environment for transgender people. And suddenly, this wasn't simply about Sophie Cunningham's opinion anymore. It became a battle over women's sports, inclusion, free speech, and the responsibility athletes have when they use their platforms. But the reaction that came next would take Cunningham's comments somewhere she probably never expected, the White House. For Sophie Cunningham, the controversy was already spreading fast, but then it reached a place almost no WNBA player expects to find themselves mentioned, the White House. On July 23, 2026, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt was asked about Cunningham's comments during a briefing. Her response immediately pushed the story into another league entirely. Leavitt said President Donald Trump was following the controversy and strongly agreed with the position Cunningham had expressed about women's sports. Then Leavitt went even further. She described Cunningham as an accomplished female athlete who was speaking the truth and criticized the backlash she had received. Think about the shift. Just days earlier, Cunningham was answering questions about her personal beliefs in an ESPN profile. Now the White House was publicly defending her. And that instantly changed how people viewed the story. For Cunningham supporters, the White House response looked like validation. They saw a professional athlete willing to say something controversial and then receiving support from the highest levels of government. Critics saw something completely different. They argued that Cunningham's comments were being pulled into a much larger political fight over transgender rights and women's sports. There was another twist, too. Cunningham herself has said she considers her political views very much in the middle, saying she agrees with some positions on both sides. But once the White House amplified her comments, that nuance became much harder to see. Suddenly, Sophie Cunningham wasn't just being discussed by basketball fans. Politicians, activists, commentators, and people who had probably never watched one of her games were weighing in. And the attention was only getting bigger. Because the next chapter wouldn't happen behind a microphone or inside the White House. It would happen courtside when two teenage fans walked into a WNBA arena carrying a simple message of support, and the night took a shocking turn. The controversy around Sophie Cunningham had already become impossible to ignore. But on July 28, it followed her directly into a WNBA arena, and this time, two teenagers found themselves caught in the middle of it. The Indiana Fever traveled to Seattle to face the storm, and two 16-year-old girls were sitting courtside. They weren't players, coaches, or political activists. They were fans. They wore shirts from XXXY Athletics and held signs thanking Cunningham for speaking up about girls in sports. According to reports, one of the signs simply read, "Thank you, Sophie, for speaking up for girls." But the atmosphere inside the arena was already tense. Supporters of Cunningham had gathered outside before the game, while people on the opposite side of the debate were also making their voices heard. The controversy that had started with one athlete's interview was now playing out in front of thousands of basketball fans. Then the situation took a much more personal turn. According to the teenagers' account, Storm minority co-owner Celeste Keaton approached them during the game and confronted them over their signs. They said Keaton used profanity and called them effing insane. An independent journalist who was nearby later reported the incident, and the Storm acknowledged that one of its co-owners had made comments to two fans. The girls later described being shocked by the confrontation. What had started as two young fans showing support for a player had suddenly become part of a much bigger conflict. And the story didn't disappear when the final buzzer sounded. The Seattle Storm issued an apology saying every fan should feel welcome and respected, but that wasn't enough to end the controversy. Because now the WNBA itself was about to get involved, and the punishment that followed would put an ownership figure in the spotlight. What happened next was something few people expected to see in professional sports. The WNBA stepped into the controversy and disciplined a member of the Seattle Storm's ownership group. On July 30, the league announced that Storm co-owner Celeste Keaton had been suspended from attending the team's next 5 home games and fined an undisclosed amount following the confrontation with two teenage fans. That decision immediately changed the story. Until that point, the argument had largely been about Sophie Cunningham's comments and the increasingly heated debate surrounding women's sports. But now, the league was dealing with something completely different: how an owner had treated fans inside the arena. And ownership discipline is a different level of consequence. Players and coaches are routinely fined or suspended for conduct. But when the person being punished actually has a stake in the franchise, the message carries a different weight. The Seattle Storm also apologized. Majority owner Ginny Gilder said the organization was committed to making sure every fan felt welcome while the team respected the league's decision. For the two teenagers, however, the most important part wasn't the fine or suspension. It was knowing that the incident had been taken seriously. And then came the response from the person at the center of the entire controversy. Sophie Cunningham could have used the punishment to attack her critics. She could have demanded an even stronger response. Instead, she took a surprisingly different approach. She defended the teenagers, criticized Keaton's behavior, and emphasized that people could disagree about complicated issues without treating each other cruelly. That response created another twist in a story that had already gone far beyond basketball. Because the player who had become famous for refusing to back down from controversy was now choosing something very different, not more outrage but restraint. And that may have been the most unexpected moment of the entire saga. The easiest thing for Sophie Cunningham to do would have been to make the situation even louder. After two teenage fans supporting her were reportedly confronted by Seattle Storm co-owner Celeste Keaton, Cunningham had every reason to be furious. The girls had traveled to watch the Fever, held signs thanking her for speaking up for girls, and suddenly found themselves at the center of a confrontation. The Storm apologized, and the WNBA eventually suspended Keaton for 5 home games and issued an undisclosed fine. But Cunningham's response wasn't what many people expected. Instead of turning the incident into another political attack, she tried to pull the conversation back toward something much simpler: basic respect. Cunningham wrote that she believed there should be a safe space and love for everybody, including biological girls, biological boys, trans women, and trans men. She made it clear that people could disagree with one another and still be kind. Then she directly praised the two teenagers. She called them brave for standing up for what they believed and teased that they would be hearing from her soon because she wanted to send them gifts. That small promise completely changed the tone of the story. For days, Cunningham had been portrayed by supporters and critics as a symbol in a much larger cultural battle. But here, her attention wasn't on politicians, commentators, or social media arguments. It was on two teenagers who had come to a basketball game to support her. She still criticized Keaton's behavior, calling it embarrassing and questioning what it revealed about her leadership. But she didn't call for revenge. She didn't tell fans to attack the Storm. She simply drew a line between disagreement and personal hostility. And that may have been the most unexpected twist of all. The player at the center of one of the WNBA's fiercest debates wasn't asking everyone to agree with her. She was asking them to disagree without losing their humanity. And suddenly, the story wasn't only about what Sophie Cunningham believed. It was about how she chose to respond when the controversy became personal. But just when it seemed the controversy surrounding Sophie Cunningham might finally settle down, it followed her right back onto the basketball court. On August 8, Cunningham and the Indiana Fever faced the Chicago Sky in a game that quickly became another major talking point. During a fast break play, Chicago's Dijon Carrington came from behind and struck Cunningham around the head and neck while she was attempting a layup. After a review, officials upgraded the foul to a flagrant 2, automatically ejecting Carrington from the game. Cunningham immediately got up and confronted Carrington, creating another heated moment before teammates stepped in. The play itself became controversial, but what happened afterward pushed the story far beyond the court. Shortly after her ejection, Carrington posted white privilege on social media while tagging the Indiana Fever. The post sparked an entirely new debate about whether race had played a role in how the foul was judged. Cunningham rejected that idea. She argued that the decision had nothing to do with race and pointed out that she had previously received an ejection for a similar type of foul herself. In her view, the officials had simply made a basketball decision based on the play. Carrington later said the foul was never intentional, while also clarifying that people had made assumptions about what she meant by her white privilege post. And somehow, Cunningham was once again at the center of another national WNBA conversation. What makes this moment so interesting is how quickly her story keeps changing. 1 month, she's at the center of a debate about women's sports. Then she's defending teenage fans. Now she's involved in another heated confrontation that has brought race, officiating, and player treatment into the spotlight. At this point, the question isn't whether Sophie Cunningham attracts controversy. It's what happens next every time she does. At this point, Sophie Cunningham is no longer simply being talked about as a basketball player. In just a matter of weeks, she has become one of the most polarizing personalities in the WNBA. Her comments about transgender athletes pushed her into a national political conversation. The White House publicly amplified her position, and the confrontation involving two teenage fans turned her into an even bigger symbol of the debate. But there is another side to this story. Cunningham has repeatedly said that people make assumptions about her politics. She describes herself as very much in the middle, saying she agrees with some positions on both sides. Yet her willingness to speak openly on controversial issues has made her especially popular with conservative audiences, while drawing criticism from others inside and outside the WNBA. And now, her influence appears to be growing beyond the court. Her social media following has surged, her jersey and commercial profile have received increased attention, and major media outlets are treating her less like a role player and more like a cultural figure. There has even been speculation about whether she could eventually move into politics or another media-driven career after basketball, but that remains speculation. Cunningham herself has not announced any political ambitions. What is undeniable is that her identity as a public figure is changing. She can still be found competing, defending teammates, and getting involved in heated moments on the court. But now, every comment, gesture, and confrontation carries much more weight because millions of people are watching. And perhaps that is the real story. Sophie Cunningham didn't set out to become the face of a national culture war. She answered a controversial question, refused to retreat from her beliefs, and suddenly discovered that the world was paying attention. The question now isn't whether Sophie Cunningham will remain controversial. It's whether she can turn this unexpected spotlight into a lasting legacy, and what that legacy will ultimately look like.
If you made it this far, you already know this story is far from over. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this changes everything, or are people overreacting? Hit the like button if you enjoyed this breakdown. It really helps push videos like this out to more viewers. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next update, because things are moving fast and there's a lot more coming. I want to hear your take. Does this shift the balance, or will defenses find another way to respond? Share this video with someone who needs to see this, especially if they've been following this story closely. Turn on notifications so you're always the first to know when new content drops. If you've got a different perspective, drop it below. I read a lot of the comments and the discussions here are always interesting. Let me know what you think happens next, because this could go in a lot of directions. And if you enjoy content that breaks things down in a simple, engaging way, stick around. There's plenty more on the way. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.